Hello and welcome to the Alpha Edge Podcast, the show for men over 50 who refuse to fade out, slow down, play small, or settle for average. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert, coach, and founder of the Alpha Edge, and I am here to help you get and stay strong in every dimension of your life, physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, and spiritually. You're here because you're ready to reclaim your power, to own your masculinity, and lead your life with strength and purpose. If you're ready to sharpen your edge, revive your drive, and lead like a man who's built for more, you're in the right place. All right, men, let's get after it. Okay, guys, welcome back to the Alpha Edge Podcast. Today I'm going to do something completely different. So since everybody listening to this is, in fact, a podcast listener by definition, I want to share with you guys 3 podcasts that literally changed the trajectory of my life. And I want to share some insight with you that I hope you find useful in your own journey. I'm also hoping that this episode will serve as a bit of an introduction to me, since we're 25 plus episodes into this podcast. And unless you're one of the guys that happens to be in our Alpha Edge membership, or maybe you found your way here because you listened to my other podcast, the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show, you probably don't know that much about me. And you're like, who is this guy and why should I listen to him? So I'm hoping that in this podcast, you'll get to learn a little bit more about me, but more importantly, that you'll get some actionable takeaways to help you become the holistic, strongest, most masculine version of yourself. So, here at the Alpha Edge, when we talk about strength, we're talking about the 5 pillars of strength. So that's physical, mental, emotional, moral, and spiritual strength. That's what we consider being holistically strong here. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this thing off. I'm going to start with a brief introduction of who I am today, and then I'm going to tell you kind of how I got here, right? So today, I'm a healthy aging expert. I'm a nutrition coach. I'm a personal trainer. I'm the founder of a company called The Silver Edge, as well as a new company called The Alpha Edge. I'm also, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the host of the Over 50 Health and Wellness Podcast. And at the time of this recording, that podcast is 360 something episodes and has been running for over 5 years. So I founded the Silver Edge business about 5.5 years ago, specifically to help men and women primarily in their 50s and 60s. I want to help them get and stay in the best shape of their lives. That was the original mission of the Silver Edge. As you're going to hear here in just a minute, I went from the worst shape in my life in my 40s to the best shape of my life in my 50s. And I was really passionate about that. So I wanted to share that with other people. So I did what a lot of people do when they have these amazing life transforming health events in their lives. I got a nutrition certification. I got a personal trainer certification. I went back and got a second nutrition certification. I got some more additional personal trainer certifications, eventually became a CrossFit coach, all of that kind of stuff. And at the time, I was a corporate guy. I sold technology. I'd been with the same company for 22 years. I retired from corporate life, and now I do this full time. So that's who I am today. Today in the Silver Edge, I have 3 amazing coaches that work with me. Like I said, we specialize in working with men and women in that practice, primarily in their 50s and 60s. Yeah, we've got some younger people, and yeah, we got some older people, but that's really our sweet spot. So earlier this year, I felt called to branch out from my work with the Silver Edge. And look, it's not like I wasn't busy enough in my Silver Edge business that I just had spare time, but I really felt called to speak to men. And so earlier this year, I created the Alpha Edge specifically to serve men. And what was happening was I was having these conversations with some of my male one-on-one clients, and these conversations were beyond the normal diet and exercise, more than just, hey, here's your macros and how do we burn some fat and build some muscle, all of which, look, I'm passionate about. I think if you're a guy listening to this, you should be passionate about that as well. But these conversations were really lighting me up. So some of my male clients, we were talking more about relationships. We were talking about navigating woke culture and what does it mean to be a strong masculine man in today's world. And like I said, I just really felt called to tug on that string a little bit, tug on that thread, if you will. And that's what led me to starting the Alpha Edge and, of course, the Alpha Edge podcast as a companion to that. So that's who I am today. That's what I do today. I've got these two businesses. I am passionate about health and fitness. I'm passionate about healthy aging. I'm also passionate about masculinity. I'm passionate about helping men reclaim their fire and develop their strength. Again, that holistic strength. So that's what the Alpha Edge is all about. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know if you've listened to any of the past podcasts, but I want to back up a little bit because I wasn't always fit. And I certainly wasn't always masculine. In fact, far, far from it. So let me back up, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so ago. So in my mid 40s, I found myself as weak, sick, and unhealthy as I'd ever been in my life. And here's the weird part. I didn't realize I was in that state. So at that point in my life, let's say mid 40s-ish, I was a corporate dude, so I was a sales guy. And look, not to brag, but I was a really good sales guy. I was a good corporate sales guy. I sold technology to very large companies. That was my gig. So I traveled a lot. And at the time, I was winning these awards. In fact, for a couple of years running, I was the rep of the year. So I was the best sales rep that company had. And I got a lot of accolades there. I'm not gonna lie, I made good money. I had a great big house. I had a fancy BMW. I had this badass offshore fishing boat. My kids were young. I had this beautiful wife. And from the outside, it looked like everything was just amazing. And in some ways, it really was, right? I was providing for my family. But here's the deal. I certainly wasn't the best husband. I wasn't the best father. I wasn't showing up very well at home because work was just taking it out of me, right? So like I said, I traveled a lot. I poured everything into the job. That's how I identified myself. That's how I got validation. My bosses would slap me on the back and say, "Hey, keep making us money, kid," right? And I would just go out and get it. I was a grinder. And I based my identity on that. But here's the deal. So in my mid 40s, I was skinny fat. I was getting ready to say I was fat. That's not fair. I was 20 pounds, maybe overweight. But here's the deal. All of that weight was in my gut. So I had this beer gut. And in my boobs. I had these man boobs, kind of oddly enough. But my arms and my legs were stick skinny. Now, I live at the beach. Actually, right now, I'm living out on a farm here close to the beach. But during this time, my 40s, I was on the beach. So not a great look when you got to go out to the beach and take your shirt off, right? To have the big old dad bod with the beer belly and the man boobs. But stick skinny arms and legs. But that's where I was. The other thing you need to know is I was a heavy drinker. So in my 40s, I drank every single day. Now, I already told you I had a big fancy house. I'm a passionate reader. I love reading. I still have my library here, but it's a much more modest library. But in that big fancy house, because remember, I was tonning the money back then. When we bought this house, my wife had made one of the rooms, had these beautiful glass doors on it. She had a carpenter come in and custom build a library for me. So we had all these shelves custom built. And because I was a heavy drinker and my wife was also a fairly heavy drinker at the time, she built me a wet bar in there. So this was my sanctuary. This was my library. She put a couple of beautiful chairs in there and a little end table. So here's what would happen. I would go and I'd be on the road for a day or two, or maybe even a week, whatever. I'd come home and actually let me back up. Every night when I came home, whether I was traveling or not, that's the first thing I did. I would go into my library and I would close those doors. So cutting myself off from my family. Now, my wife was allowed to come in. She could come in and have a glass of wine with me, but I would make a cocktail and I'd sit there and I'd typically read and I would have my 30 minutes or so to decompress. In other words, here comes dad. Dad's home. The kids are happy to see me. And what do? I wall them off, literally shut them out. I'm in my sanctuary and I'm having drinks. All right. So not proud dad moment at all. Just not really showing up as my best self as a father, obviously. But I was super, super stressed. I had insomnia. And look, guys, I'm not going to lie. There were some warning signs here. My libido was kind of in the tank. I was stressed all the time, but I just didn't realize how bad I was. But here's where everything changes. One day I came home from a business trip. I was in San Jose, California with some clients, and I came home, I was all worked up. I got home late in the afternoon and I just felt like crap. I just really felt crap. And I told my wife, I think I'm coming down with something. I just don't feel well. I went to bed early and I don't remember getting out of bed. I honestly don't remember. I don't know if I fell out of bed or if I stumbled out of bed, but all of a sudden I found myself on my hands and knees on the floor in my bedroom and I just had this wild chest pain. Just crazy chest pain. Of course, by this point, my wife was alarmed. She was there with me. She got 911 on the phone, said, my husband's having chest pains. He's not really responsive. And they're like, ma'am, we are dispatching the ambulance. We'll be there right away. I want you to stay on the phone with me. And she's like, hey, look, I'm only 5 minutes literally from the emergency room. Should I take him? They're like, dear Lord, no, don't do that. You stay right there with him. We're going to keep you on the phone. We've already dispatched that ambulance. My wife's like, the hell with that. She packs me up, throws me into the car. It's 4:00 in the morning. We go zooming through the, deserted, dark streets of Wilmington. And of course, we come screeching up to the emergency room, and here's this 50-something-year-old dude complaining of chest pain. They don't mess around, right? I get admitted immediately. I go back there, and here's where things get a little bit weird. They hook me up to an EKG, and I have an abnormal EKG. And now here's where things really ratchet up. They were pretty intense up till now, right? Like I said, middle-aged dude comes in complaining of chest pain. They're not messing around. This isn't their first rodeo there at the emergency room. But the abnormal EKG obviously was something that they didn't like at all. And literally this SWAT team of men and women come in and start prepping me for a heart cath. Now, at this point, I don't know, 5-10 minutes have passed since I got into the emergency room. I take my wife's hand because they're getting ready to wheel me back. And I just tell her as heartfelt as I possibly can that I love her and I don't regret anything. I wasn't sure I was going to see her again. I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know what was happening. All of this was happening so fast. Of course, my wife's in tears. It's just this very, very dramatic moment. Now, I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to skip you all the gory details. I did spend 3 days in that hospital. At one point, the nurses were calling me their house patient. I guess House is a TV show where there's a doctor who, I don't know, I guess he's like a detective. He figures out what disease you have when nobody else can figure it out. So what had happened was there was nothing wrong with my heart. There was nothing at all wrong with my heart. They tested on my heart. There was nothing wrong with my lungs or my respiratory system because Lord knows they did every test they possibly could there. I was just really, really metabolically sick and stress had finally caught up with me. And so that became known as, in my family, as Dad's fake heart attack event. So in my mid-40s, like I said, I spent 3 days in the hospital. They finally dispatched me. And now to this day, we still haven't figured out what happened. I don't know why I had an irregular and abnormal EKG. Maybe, I don't know, did they have false positives or false negatives or whatever that is? I don't know. Obviously, something was very alarming. They went in, they opened me up I think they were going to put stents in or whatever they have to do in heart catheterizations. They got it in there and like, this dude's fine. There's nothing wrong with his heart. Thank God, right? So at any rate, I tell you that story because that's literally the turning point in my life. So I was in my mid-40s, and here's the deal. I didn't know I was sick. I didn't realize how stressed I was. I didn't realize how unhealthy I was. And when I looked around at my same age peers, other dudes in their mid-40s, early 50s, just my peer group, we all kind of looked alike. We all had dad bods. We all drank heavily because that's kind of what I did. And as a sales guy, I was out whining and dining my clients, and they just loved it, right? And of course, when I was hanging out with other sales guys, guess what we do? We drink because the corporate culture is kind of, hey, we work hard, we play hard, that sort of thing. And I just really let myself go, but that was my baseline. I didn't really know what was happening. Now things are getting ready to get worse, right? As I got home, I went back to my regular physician. He was actually pretty straightforward with me. He's like, Kev, I think his exact words were, if you don't get your shit together, you're going to have a real heart attack. His advice was, hey, you need to start exercising and eat less. So move more, eat less kind of thing. And so, like I said, it's going to get worse. It was a few weeks after that where I had my first bout of just complete and total erectile dysfunction. Just completely couldn't get it up. I don't know if any of you listening have been there, but I'm here to tell you, guys, that's a shitty place to be. It's very humiliating. It's embarrassing. And I just couldn't understand. So I go running back to the doctor and I'm like, doctor, I'm sick. Something horrible is happening. I need you to fix me. And of course, My doctor very grudgingly, he said, look, you kind of need to get your shit together, Kevin. But very grudgingly, he prescribed me some, I think, Viagra and Cialis. He gave me a prescription, but said, hey, try these, see if that helps. They kind of did, but not really. Because the problem wasn't blood flow into the penis, physiological. The problem was just metabolic, really, really crappy health, insomnia, constant drinking, constant stress, and no Cialis was just going to overcome that. Now, I did end up talking my doctor into sending, referring me over to a urologist. And of course, the urologist is only too happy to look at your low testosterone and write you a prescription for testosterone. That's what they do, right? So in my mid 40s, I went on testosterone. I was doing an injection every week. I can't remember the exact doses. But over time, like a month or so later, I did feel a little bit better. The ED was, I'm not saying I was a raging libido monster or anything, but at least the libido came back a little. So I felt a little bit better. But here's the deal. I was still doing everything else wrong. Now, I honestly wanted to change my life. I wanted to get in shape. In my 30s, I'd done a number of marathons. I'd done a whole bunch of triathlons. I'd been a surfer. So I had an idea of what getting in shape meant. So I went back to what I knew. I was running. And I was running all the damn time. I was running and I was trying to diet at the same time. My doctor said, hey, you need to move more, eat less. And in my mind, that meant lace up the shoes, hit the pavement, and start trying to eat salads. I hate salads, but I was really trying to eat them. And you know where that leads, right? You're not going to do something you absolutely despise if you're not feeling the benefit of it for too long. So I was really off and on. Now, during this time, I cut back on my drinking. So instead of 3 or 4 cocktails a night, I was having 1 or 2 cocktails a night. And of course, then the weekends, all hell would break loose and all bets were off. But in my mind, that was an improvement, right? And I was getting these spectacularly unremarkable results. In other words, I wasn't really getting healthier. I didn't feel any better. All right. I tell you all of that to say that I was, in my effort to get healthy, I started to do some research. I was reading books. I had just discovered podcasts. And I'm trying to think back then. I know I'd listened to Rich Roll's podcast. He was a ultra triathlete guy, if you know who Rich Roll is. To this day, he still has a podcast. Hats off to that dude, right? Because this was 15 years ago, probably. That dude's just been really steady. I listened to Ben Greenfield. I listened to a couple other podcasts. I don't remember where I first heard this first podcast, but I'm going to give you 3 podcasts here that literally changed my life. And the first one, again, I don't remember what podcast this was, but the guest was a guy named Dr. Jonathan Sullivan. And he had written a book. I don't know if it was just recently or he had written it a while ago, but he wrote a book called The Barbell Prescription, Strength Training for Life After 40, something like that. And guys, I'll throw a link to that in the show notes here if you're interested. But he was the co-author on that book. He wrote that book with a guy named Andy Baker. Now, side note, over on the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show, I have since had both Dr. Jonathan Sullivan and Andy Baker on that podcast as guests. But at the time, I'd never heard of Dr. Jonathan Sullivan or Andy Baker for that matter, or the Barbell Prescription. But Dr. Jonathan Sullivan was on this interview and he was making a case that strength training, not cardio, not running, not aerobics, but strength training was the way to, especially for older people, to lose fat, build muscle, and most of all, to get metabolically healthy. Now, his background, he was a trauma surgeon in a big, busy, I think maybe in Detroit, but in a big metropolitan area. So he was a trauma surgeon in an emergency room, and he would see all these dudes like me, right, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, coming in with all these horrible, heart attacks and stuff like that brought on by their lifestyle. And he thought, man, I'm just putting Band-Aids on things. I'm not making a difference. I'm not making an impact in the world. And so he switched his focus to try and get out in front of, he doesn't want a guy to end up, a 50, 60-year-old guy to end up obese and high cholesterol, high blood pressure, to end up on his operating table with a heart attack. He wants to get in front of that. And he was making this very compelling case that strength training, like picking up a barbell and classic bodybuilding, strength training, powerlifting type movements were the ultimate way to burn fat, build muscle, and really to become metabolically healthy. So I'd never heard a message like that before in my life. And get this, at age now, I'm probably in my late 40s. I had never been in a gym a day in my life. I'd never lifted a barbell. I probably would have lifted some dumbbells somewhere in my life, but I wasn't ever strong. I had never been in a gym. And so after listening to that podcast, I bought that book, I read it, and let's just say I was all in. I was like, holy crap, this is the thing I've been missing. And so I went to a local gym here in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was a Gold's Gym back in the day. And guys, let me tell you what, it's not fair to say I was intimidated or I was shy. I was terrified. I was freaking terrified because at this point now, remember, I told you I was overweight. I had the dad bod and skinny arms, skinny legs. I hadn't really improved that much with all the running and trying to eat salads I've done. All I'd done really was gotten weaker, if anything. A tiny bit smaller, but I'd lost more muscle than fat, I think, at that time. So I'm walking into this Gold Gym. I want you to imagine this. There are all these big, buff dudes in the back, and they're grunting, and there's tons of weight on their barbells, and there's these ladies in spandex and skimpy outfits, and they're all pretty freaking strong as well. And I was terrified. I was almost overwhelmed. I went by myself, and looking back, that was a mistake. I should have at least got a buddy or somebody to come in there with me, but it was really intimidating. So I just very meekly, I didn't go anywhere near the barbells and the free weights. That was just too intimidating to start with. I would just watch like somebody on a leg extension machine and think, I could probably do that. And I would go sit down on the machine after they got up, and I'd move the pin around until I found a weight that I could do. And that's how I started. I started just by going and kind of wandering around. Now, from there, I eventually got up the guts to hire a personal trainer there. And I'm not going to lie, the first couple of trainers were a joke, but at least it was somebody who said, hey, you need to have a routine. You can't just come in and do willy-nilly whatever, just walk around. You should do, first we're going to do legs, and then we're going to do back, and then we're going to do chest, and then we're going to do arms and shoulders, right? So I got an idea of what that looked like, and they brought me away from the machines over to the free weights, some of them did. But it wasn't until, like I said, that probably that third trainer, because these were young dudes, and they were just turning over in this environment. But at some point, one of the dudes asked me what I ate. I think at the time I might have been damn near vegetarian because, again, I was trying to lose weight. And that guy was like, dude, nah, you need to eat big to get big. And I'm thinking, well, I'm trying to lose this fat, buddy. And he's like, nah, man, what you need to do is lift heavy and eat food, especially protein. Just eat it, dude. Eat it. What protein powder are you taking? I'm like, I'm not taking it. Well, we sell some, and don't you get out of here until I get you a big old tub of protein powder. And that's what changed right there. When I started to look at food as fuel to build muscle, and I started actually strength training, everything changed. I mean, everything changed. Looking back at it, I think within 6 months, I took myself off testosterone. I mean, I just felt really, really good. My libido came back. My energy came back. I didn't have that mid-afternoon crash. I started to actually see muscle on my body. My belly, even though I was eating more, actually started to shrink. My man boobs went away and turned into muscle from bench pressing. I'm telling you, it was certainly within 12 months, I wasn't even the same person. I was a completely different person. And that's what really got me hooked. And that's what started me on this whole journey of, hey, I'm not going to be a tech sales guy much longer, because my mission is to help other men and women discover what I've discovered. Eating protein and lifting weights is actually a prescription for metabolic health as well as body composition change. So that's the first podcast that really had an impact. And when I say really had an impact, who knows, that podcast may have saved my life. I don't know. If I'd have kept going the way I was going, I might be dead now. Who knows? I might have had a real heart attack. Might have been that guy that at 50 years old, somebody's like, hey, whatever happened to that Kevin guy? Oh, you didn't hear? He had a heart attack and died. Yeah. Just fell out one day. No kidding. Could have been that guy. But instead, things drastically changed. So like I said, I became a student of strength training. I learned everything I could. I bought more books. I listened to more podcasts. I got better and better trainers, and then eventually, of course, became a trainer myself. And here I am today helping other men and women, especially in our age group, right? I really specialize with the 50, 60, even 70-year-olds and trying to get strong, lean, vital, capable. So that was the first podcast. I don't remember the podcast it was on, but the guest was Dr. Jonathan Sullivan. And to this day, that's one of the books I recommend the most to men and women, by the way, is The Barbell Prescription. All right, so that's podcast number 1. Podcast number 2, again, I don't remember where I heard this, what show this was on, but it was an interview with a guy named Dr. Robert Glover. He had just written a book, or probably hadn't just written a book, or maybe, I don't remember the timing, but he's the author of the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. Now, we've already had a podcast on No More Mr. Nice Guy, and I've talked about Dr. Glover, and I've talked a little bit about my journey there. But at this point in my life, this was about the same time as I probably would have encountered Barbell Prescription. I don't remember which one came first, but this one was a gut punch. So as I listened to Dr. Robert Glover talk about the nice guy syndrome, it was literally like he was talking to me. It's like he was inside my head and understood my psyche, and it was a gut punch. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. I didn't like it. He was holding up a mirror to me that I couldn't look away from. And basically it was, Kevin, you're a little bitch and you're living in little bitch energy. And what you think is being a nice guy is really you shirking responsibility, you being a coward, you shying away from owning who you really are. And of course, long story short, I bought the book, I devoured it, and that, along with the Barbell Prescription, is one of the most recommended books, or books that I've actually given away. I've given that book away multiple times. Funny story, I actually have a nephew, and without him knowing, I didn't say anything to him, I had that book, I just ordered it on Amazon, had it sent to him. His girlfriend at the time, a living girlfriend, they're pretty serious, she opens the package and she sees the book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, and she confronts my nephew. She's like, what the hell is this? What No More Mr. Nice Guy? What are you trying to do, right? And of course, long story short is he had no idea who sent it. I had to fess up, no, I sent that. And my advice was, both of you read it. Both of you read it. Because really, when we're talking about killing the nice guy, we're not talking about not being a good person. We're talking about killing little bitch energy. We're talking about a man owning and stepping into his true masculine strength and what that means. So that was another turning point in my life. And given how I'm here and I have a company called the Silver Edge and another company called the Alpha Edge, it was really that No More Mr. Nice Guy that kind of got me down that path of really examining, doing a little bit of work. That led me to the work of Robert Bly, who wrote Iron John, that academic, philosophical, mythopoetic, if you will, view of masculinity, very famous book in masculine circles, but really got me interested in what does it mean to be masculine? And certainly, what does it mean to be masculine in today's world? Now, remember, this would probably be 12 years ago, at least a decade ago. We weren't quite as crazy and wacky as we are today, but that was a major turning point in my life. I started to look at my psychology. I developed a code for myself. In other words, I knew what I stood for and what I stood against, and I started to try and live in alignment with that. And notice when I was out of alignment with that, I also deliberately tried to connect with other men who were on a masculine journey or who were more masculine than me. Just like in strength training, I wanted to hang around people who were ahead of me. In business, I want my business mentors and people I hang around with and entrepreneurs to be ahead of me. I want guys to pull me up. I want them to hold me accountable. So really all that came from a podcast that I heard with, again, this guy called Dr. Robert Glover. I will throw a link to that book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, into the show notes as well. You guys, strongly recommend you pick that up and read that if that resonates with you. All right, so those are the first two podcasts that really changed my life. Now, the third one, this is interesting because this is a podcast that I was the host on. So I remember exactly what show this was on. I remember when it happened. This was the very beginning. It was like, I think this released January 1st or 2nd in 2023. And the podcast was titled A Beginner's Guide to the Sober Curious Movement. It was with a woman named Karolina Radkowska. I'm butchering that name. It's Rzadkowolska, I think. So at any rate, I had her on. I had been wanting to do a episode on the sober curious movement, on just doing a dry January, sober October. So at this point in my life, so this is just a couple years ago, right? This is January 23. This is 2.5 years ago from the time I'm recording this. Now, so at that point in my life, I was still drinking. Now, my drinking was mostly just of 2-3 drinks on the weekend, and maybe if it was date night, I'd have a couple glasses of wine, or maybe if it particularly a hectic day, I'd have a cocktail or two at home. But I had broken free from that drinking every day, that drinking heavily every day. And now I was drinking what I thought was, quote unquote, a healthy amount. Now, look, I already told you I got a couple different nutrition certifications. Yes, the nerd part of my brain says the healthy amount of drinks, whether it's spirits, beer, or even red wine, is 0. There are no metabolic health benefits to alcohol. It is metabolic poison, full stop, period. I don't care what the Blue Zone guy says about he's going to drink wine every day because people in Greece live longer. That's bullshit. Alcohol is metabolic poison, period, full stop. However, look, I'll back off that just a little bit. When we look at holistic health, could there possibly be a context where you have a glass of wine with your wife on date night where you're bonding deeply, and would that glass of wine have some benefit in allowing you to maybe relax and drop your inhibitions a little bit and maybe pour into and connect with your wife on a deeper level? And wouldn't that be holistically a little bit healthier than maybe not having the wine and having a tenser dinner? Maybe, but put a pin in that. Because when I had this woman, Carolina, on as a guest on my podcast back in January 2023, I thought we were going to talk about the sober curious movement, which we did. And I thought we were going to talk about all the health reasons why you shouldn't drink alcohol, which I already knew. And I wanted this to be at the beginning of January because I knew a lot of people were going to do a dry January. I had done several of them myself, and I was actually starting to like. I had done dry October that year, and then I did dry January the year before. I was actually enjoying my time of having a month off of drinking, because what was happening was I was having 0 hangovers. So at this point in my life, even 2 drinks, whether it was wine, beer, liquor, it didn't matter. I woke up the next day, I felt like shit. I just felt shitty. I wasn't my 100% self. And that was my motivation to not drink. But here's where things got a little bit crazy in that interview. I was telling Carolina, I was like, hey, look, my wife's she's a realtor. And for example, when I go out with her, she's a successful realtor. And so these days, instead of her going to my club trips, I'm going to fancy dinners and trips with her because she's the one winning awards in her company. And when I go to, say, a real estate awards dinner, I don't really know any of those people there. And the conversation is, of course, 100% real estate, which I don't care about. I'm just looking for a fit dude that I can go find and say, hey, what do you do for a workout? And have a conversation, right? But look, that's also a hard drinking crowd, not cracking on you realtors, but holy moly, there seems to be a lot of alcohol there. And I was telling her, my guest on this podcast, I said, that's the moment when I really feel like I need a drink. I have to have a drink in my hand. And I was telling her, it's like, look, once I have that second glass of wine at that event, all of a sudden, Super Kevin comes out. Now I have an opinion on the interest rates in the real estate market here at the beach and how it's the booms, bust, whatever. All of a sudden, I'm the life of the party. And Carolina, she got a smile and she said, okay, Kevin, why is that? I said, why is what? I said, what is lacking in you that you don't feel like you're worthy of being the life of the party without having a couple drinks in you? And I'm like, well, that's all of a sudden we got kind of heavy. I was like, well, okay. I guess just having a couple glasses of wine kind of, it reduces my inhibitions. It relaxes me a little bit. And she goes, why are you not relaxed? Why are you tense in the first place? I said, well, I don't really know these people. The conversation isn't one I'm particularly interested in. She goes, but it is when you have alcohol, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess. And so you fit in and you feel accepted when you've got a couple drinks in you. I was like, yeah, what's wrong with that? And she goes, well, just think about it. What are you saying about yourself? Are you not good enough to interact with that crowd? Do you not have valuable input to share with these people when you're the sober Kevin versus the, let's say, buzzed Kevin? And I was like, oh, crap. Well, I didn't really think about it that way. And it was that conversation with her. She kind of turned the tables on me there. All of a sudden, she was the interviewer and I was the interviewee. And coming out of that, since it was January, I was already doing dry January, right? This was January. Like I said, this episode released on the 1st or the 2nd of that year. So I already wasn't drinking. And during that month, I took some time to think. I was like, why am I drinking? Why do I feel like there's, drunk Kevin and sober Kevin? And I've often joked in the past, somebody would say something about something I said when I was buzzed or drunk. I said, you're going to have to take that up with drunk Kevin because, I got nothing to do with that. And everybody would laugh, ha, 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 very funny. But here I was now I'm questioning alcohol from a completely different perspective. I'm questioning alcohol from a psychological perspective as opposed to a physiological perspective, which my coach brain can easily grab a hold of. My nutrition coach brain can go, yeah, there's nothing good about having alcohol in your body from a cellular metabolism, health perspective. There isn't. And that's the lens I was looking at alcohol through. And now Carolina had just brought in this whole psychological idea of, are you not worthy? What insecurity is making you feel like you need this? And so what happened was in that year, I did dry January and dry February together. So that's the first time I'd ever done 2 months sober in my life. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Now, look, I'm not lying. March 1st, I had my favorite cocktail. I had a gin and tonic. By that time, I was more of a mixer snob than I even was a gin snob. But I had a really high-end gin. I had like a Fever Tree tonic water, if you know what that is, like a craft tonic water. So I had this, and I had fresh limes. I had it all set out, and I went back to my normal way. But here's what happened. I immediately, of course, having gone 2 months without having a drink and then just having a couple drinks, woke up the next day and I just felt like crap. I was dragging ass. I wasn't my 100% self. And I wanted to be my 100% self. I wanted to be a high performer. I had this new business that I'm an entrepreneur. I'm trying to build a business. I'm trying to help people be the strongest, fittest, leanest, badassest people they possibly can be. And I can't do that when I'm running at 50%, 60%. And so I started to think about that. And then long story short, I've not had a drink of alcohol and it's been, I don't know, a year and a half. It's not like I remember the date. I do remember the time my wife had some of her real estate team over and we were doing a champagne toast. I took a sip of champagne and then put the glass down. That was the last alcohol that basically entered this body. But I do not drink now. And I'm here to tell you, I feel freaking amazing. I wake up every morning 100% ready to go. I no longer have that brain fog or that just, even as we get older, it seems like those hangovers they last a little longer. It takes less and less alcohol for you to feel really crappy. And so that's the third podcast that really was life-changing for me as to where I am right now and this time and place in my life. Those 3 podcasts really made me, I think, who I am today. I'm not sure I'd be here talking to you right now on a podcast called the Alpha Edge Podcast if it weren't for a podcast I heard with Dr. Jonathan Sullivan, if it wasn't for another podcast I heard with Dr. Robert Glover. And who knows, on the Sober Curious podcast with Carolina, maybe I'd have eventually weaned off or just really cut back on my drinking. But for me, with my kind of obsessive, addictive personality, it's just easier for me to cut it out altogether. So there you go, guys. I wanted to share, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to share these 3 podcasts with you for 2 reasons. One, I just want to give you a little background on who's this dude you're listening to every week or now twice a week. And 2, I hope that this gives you some food for thought. So I'll wrap up saying this. If you're not strength training, if you're not taking care of your physical body, if you're not choosing real whole foods, if you're not prioritizing whole foods, and you're not treating your body like a temple, you certainly should be. Give that some thought. Think about what would you need to do to become the leanest, strongest version of yourself. In the Alpha Edge and our Alpha Edge membership group, that's where we start. When we talk about the 5 pillars of strength, we start with physical strength because it bleeds over into all other areas of your life. We learn discipline. We start taking care of our bodies and we start feeling better. We have more energy. We have better mental clarity, and we can attack these other areas in our life, the moral weakness, the emotional weakness, the spiritual weakness. Once we start to become physically strong, this bleeds over into other areas of our lives. I want you guys out there, if you're not currently have some sort of daily movement practice that includes hitting the gym 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week, I want you guys to dial that in. If you don't have a good nutrition program that honors your body, that limits body fat and builds lean muscle, I want you guys to pour into that. Next up, I want you guys to think about being a nice guy. In other words, by getting your validation from external sources, by acting in ways that you think are going to get you what you want. And I want you instead to consider, what do you stand for? What do you stand against? What's your code? What's your mission? What's your purpose in life? I want you guys to put some thought into that and to really step into being that strong, masculine, purpose-driven, mission-driven man that you're meant to be. And then finally, for those of you out there that are drinkers, certainly if you're heavy drinkers, but I'm really talking to you guys that are moderate drinkers, I want you just to evaluate that. I want you to think about why you're drinking. You probably know that drinking is not healthy for you. You probably know that if you cut out the weekend beers with the buddies, you probably lose a few pounds, and all that's fine and good. But I want you to think, what's the role of alcohol in my life? Why am I drinking? What is it about me that feels like there's a better version of me, a more relaxed version of me when I get those few drinks in me? So guys, that's what I've got for you this week. I want you to consider those things. And of course, I want you to step into the strongest, most masculine, mission, purpose-led man you are called to be. Till next time, guys, stay strong. Okay, men, that's our show for this week. Don't forget to download our free guide titled How to Raise Your Testosterone Naturally. You can find the download link in the show notes for this episode on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on. If you've enjoyed today's show, here are 3 ways you can support us. Number 1, share this episode with a friend. Number 2, make sure to like and follow this show, and please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Number 3, give us a follow over at Instagram. We're at Alpha Edge Army. So that's Alpha Edge Army all run together. I really appreciate you men taking the time to listen, and until next week, stay strong.